Maarten, welcome back, dude.
Hi, super happy to be here.
Likewise, good to have you. It's been 3 years. We're celebrating the release of your book. How are you feeling about it?
I'm feeling really happy. Like the initial feedback has been positive, and I wasn't expecting such a positive release. Let's put it that way.
Why not? What
I
were
don't
you
know.
expecting?
I'm like a doomsday kind of person, you know. I just thinking like you write a book and nobody cares. That's kind of the thoughts that you have. It doesn't seem to be the case, so that's what I'm super happy about.
But why? Because you've been building up quite a bit on LinkedIn and other platforms, releasing little chunks and gathering feedback incrementally, iteratively. The responses to those little nuggets were pretty enthusiastic, to keep it very mild. So then why the tempered expectations?
It's just my personality, like a little bully on my shoulder that says it's never good enough.
How did it support you in the whole process of building and writing the book?
I don't know. I don't know if it would necessarily say it supported me. Like it's also difficult, you know. But I do want to say it also helped me because when I finished the chapter, it was already like pretty perfectionistic good. But that also means that the feedback was delayed. But because I had written so much, I already had a kind of a good idea where I wanted to take things. So there was already a lot of feedback before I had written a chapter.
Yeah. What compelled you initially to start writing the book?
Mostly because there was no book on sprint goals. This is the first one. And there are many books on product management. There are many books on Scrum. And I just felt like, I could write one of those books. But I think it's very difficult to do a better job. And I was thinking if you're the first, then at least you're the first, you know. That already removes a lot of pressure. Yep. I think that was kind of what appealed to me. It was something that really pulled me. Like this subject was intriguing to me. That was, and then if I find it intriguing, then I think there's a good chance to make other people feel that it's intriguing.
Now, Mike Cohn approached you, right? And Mike Cohn is a massive established name in the industry. How was that?
Yeah, so it was the publisher that approached me. Probably, I mean, I don't know exactly how it went down, right? But I've been writing for like 5 years or something like that. And apparently the publisher and Mike Cohn are reading my articles. And they approached me, hey, do you want to write a book? And they wanted me to write a book about serious Scrum. And I said, no, that's not the book I want to write. This is the book I want to write. And they liked it. So I wrote an outline and everything.
How did it affect you? Because I can imagine that you... Like if I just look at Xebia and all the people here, I'm almost 100% certain that everyone has a level of imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
How did it affect? How did that play out with you?
Yeah. So during the writing of the book, you start having these doubts. Like you're thinking, like, is this really good? Do I really have interesting things to say? Is anybody going to care? But the thing, like you said, because there were people reading the book who were like kind of more like, I divide them like in grumpy cats and like dolphins, you know? So there are people that more look like everything that you can do better, but there are other people who are more like positive and see all the good things in. And I had a good mix of my reviewers who did both. So what really helped me were those dolphins, right? Like I already am pretty critical myself, but all those people that just kind of said, oh, I really love this chapter. And that really energized me and made me feel like, hey, maybe there is something there. Maybe it's going to be a good book. And I needed that. But I think every person is different, right? Like every person has different challenges. But that really helped me a lot, that there also was positive feedback.
What posed the biggest challenge to you in this whole writing endeavor?
Yeah, the biggest challenge, I think, me. I'm the biggest challenge. Now, I mean, if you think about it, people are complex systems. And I always kind of sucked at school in the sense that I never did anything. Also, it continued in university. And then when writing the book, I started feeling like, oh yeah, this is why I remember why I was so lazy at high school.
Do tell us more.
No, I mean, so when I was in university, right, I was the typical student where I just would start working 1 or 2 days before. And there were like a couple of subjects where that was not possible, unfortunately. So I had to work many months to pass them. But I suck at big things. If it's really big, it's daunting. I become paralyzed and I kind of give up already. And that's how I am as a person. I'm like, I had to overcome that.
Yeah. So summarizing that, you really look up against big, audacious goals. So you figured, let's write a book.
Yes, exactly.
So how do you look back at the whole process?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at if you look at how much time I plan, so I didn't tell this story I think to you, but when you sign a contract, a book contract, they want a date, right? It's the same problem in software development. Before you start, they want a date. So you know what I did? I thought it was pretty smart. I wasn't, right? But I worked for like a week or something on the book, and I finished like 20%. Book was going to be around 250 pages. The classical planning and prediction, right? I made a burn down chart, like it's going to be around 250 pages. Yeah, so I hit almost none of the timelines. Like I predicted 6 months. The first timeline I did hit because I had to release 2 chapters. And you know why I hit that timeline? Because I finished those chapters before I signed the contract. So yeah, it took more than 3 years. And I don't know, like, I guess that's also what the book is about. It's very difficult to plan and predict. And when you plan and predict like I did, you become very frustrated because you think, I said 6 months. And every month later, you're thinking, I suck. Like, you know what I mean? And I think that's the main thing. I was treating it as a complicated problem where I think, hey, I can plan and predict. And yeah, I couldn't.
What was the most difficult thing to predict? Like, what is that you did not expect in this whole journey to pan out the way that it did?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I had forgotten how ill-disciplined I was when it comes to these big things. So the main thing I did to fix that was very interesting. So I just decided I'm going to make it super small. Every minute, right? 15 minutes. That's it. That's all. But then I actually started 15 minutes and I would actually write for 3 hours sometimes because I just was so energized. That's kind of how I tricked myself. But yeah, might not work for everybody else.
How did you combine that? Because you're working full time as well. You have a busy home life. You've got kids. You've got a wife. How did that work together?
Yeah. So I think the biggest reason I could write a book is because of my partner. Because because as you know, like when you write a book, it takes 3 years. It drags on. We had a second kid. I didn't expect how much more difficult that was.
Speaking of audacious goals.
Yeah. So she was a big help because basically during the night she did she did the breastfeed. I didn't do any of those things, but what I did do is write at night. Like I did help with the kids. I did write at night, but that was incredibly tough. That was one of the biggest. But yeah, that's the reason why it was possible. I think because of her help.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Go ahead.
I'm curious, looking back, do you see any patterns to when you were your most productive or most creative when it came to taking a opaque idea and being able to crystallize it in words for the book? Any patterns, or was it all over the place?
Yeah, so I don't know. So like I said before, I think people are different. My biggest problem is never a lack of ideas, it's execution. Like I have too many ideas and sometimes I would get stuck. Like I think the biggest problem is I would be my most productive when I felt there were no obstacles. That's kind of when it didn't mean there were no obstacles, but when in my head I had the feeling there were no obstacles. And then I could just continue writing, but then I would suddenly think, oh wait, I've got 4 parts. How's this going to work? This chapter is in the right place. Oh no, crash.
So how did you deal with these kind of things then during the night to keep up your energy levels as well? Because that is a tricky thing by itself. How do you keep 3 years of continuous development and writing going together with consulting kind of assignments?
Yeah, I don't know. Like I kind of saw it like as a ketchup bottle. Like sometimes a lot comes out, sometimes very little. You know what I mean? I try to be. The biggest thing that helped me is kind of to be nicer to myself and just be like, yeah, this. Like I'm a human being. Like sometimes a lot comes out. Sometimes I think that helped me the most. And yeah, like I said, the 15 minutes thing, like that really made a difference for me. Like the main thing is every person in this room is complex. Like they have their weird quirks, their weird behaviors. There are people out there, of course, that are probably, they can be very disciplined. Like I've heard that Henrik Nieberg, like he literally like blocks a month and he writes a book.
Is wild.
Yeah, that's what I heard. I don't know if it's true, right? But this is what I've heard. Well, I'm not that kind of person. But yeah, that's the main thing. Like, you're a complex system, to find out what works for you. And if you have problems like I do with discipline, I mean, I don't have it for writing, but I do have it for writing a book.
What's the difference?
Yeah, because you write an article in 2 or 4 hours and it's done. It's easy. If you do a lot, it's for me, that's a complicated problem, not a complex problem.
Isn't a book just a big collection of multiple articles?
No. It isn't, because every chapter needs to be connected. Like it's kind of like in German, right? Like every word is connected. Is like it has a specific order. You cannot just add a word at the end and it will still work like we do in Dutch or English. I think it's the same with writing a book. Like, yeah, if you change the final chapter, you might have to change everything in the beginning.
So you're dealing with a whole lot
It's
of
context.
Yeah.
Right? Like the context of a book is different than a blog article or a series of LinkedIn posts even.
Yeah, absolutely. And there needs to be a red line in the book, right? You cannot just say like, hey, I've read many books, I have to be fair, right? Where you read the book and you see every chapter is great. And then the book ends and you're like, what did I read? Like a bunch of great chapters. And what was the red line? What's the message? I don't know. And then you're incredibly disappointed. I mean, that's a way of writing a book. That's not how I try to do it.
So creating that consistency.
Yeah.
How often did you revise the chapters that you wrote? Like looking back, and where's the consistency?
All the time.
Is that where the 3 years went?
yeah, maybe. I'm a perfectionist, right? Like I always revised. I was always thinking like, how can I make the bridge better between the chapters and all these kind of things.
How does the feedback with such a large publishing company come in? Because I can imagine they are an established brand. They've worked with the biggest writers in the industry.
Yep.
This is your first book that you just barely started writing. How does their feedback and the way that they work come across on you as a novel writer?
I mean, I had an amazing editor. She gave really good feedback. But the main thing is sometimes I as well thought I don't agree and I'm not going to listen to the editor. And how can I say... I think let me give you an example, right? The book starts with a story, and actually the editor said, you shouldn't do that. You should first start, like, this is what the book is going to be about. And I just thought, no, I don't want to do that. Like, I want it to be like a Tarantino movie, It started with action, and then you're like, what the hell happened? I want to know more. I might have been the wrong decision, but I felt like really believe, like, strongly believe you need to break a pattern, and then you fit the pieces together, and then people will be hooked much better. So these are kind of things where, we had disagreements, but I made a choice, But on the other hand, she also did a really good job saying, hey, this is what makes the book really great. And this is what you should keep on doing. And there need to be good bridges between the chapters. So these kind of things.
Do you want to tell the listeners more about the story to get them hooked?
So it's a story from my childhood, actually. So as a child, I was dropped in Vlieland in the dark, a dropping. So basically, group of 5, 6 kids. We had to find our way back to a farmhouse, but we were in Vlieland and we didn't know Vlieland. So, basically we started thinking, okay, it's dark. Where do we go? Hey, there's a high vantage point. Let's go there. And then when we were in the high vantage point, we thought, hey, there's a road. There are multiple roads. Let's take the biggest road. Maybe that will lead us to the center. And so the plan was shaped during the journey, right? And we didn't arrive first, sadly, but we arrived second. But I think the main point of the story is this is kind of like software development. Like every step you take helps shape the way. Of course, you have a destination, but you cannot plan out all the steps. And I try to use that explanation to explain that's how most companies don't work. Because actually they think, we have to achieve this. And then they go in the meeting room and they try to think, hey, what are all the steps, all the things we have to do? So now we know it's going to take 1.5 years. Okay, great. Now we're going to execute the plan. And that's kind of what you shouldn't do.
No, but I love that goal, or not the goal, but the whole storyline, because it resonates with so many organizations that keep that fog of, I'm not going to say fog of war, but like the whole...
I call it the fog of beforehand.
That one. Yeah. And the unclarity that many organizations deal with, yet they see this, they recognize this, but they don't actively do sufficiently with this.
Correct.
In your experience, what makes it so challenging for organizations to deal with these kind of issues?
Well, like I said, right, I told you how I approached the book. I was writing a book on this topic and I made the same mistake. I was thinking it's complicated, I can predict. So it's very natural to us. And I think that's because in school and university, right, it's kind of like, here's the book, you read everything, you can get a 10, you can get 100%, or I think in Germany it's a 1, but So the main thing is that's not how most real life problems work. Like every step you take helps shape the way. You discover what you have to do while you do the work. You cannot plan all the steps. And we're not trained adequately for that because that's not how school works. School works, here's all the information and you can pass everything.
So now what's the next step for organizations after you've delivered this book? What can they do with it?
Well, they can do. So here's the thing. I think the main thing I try to do is to give all these labels that you can enable conversation, right? I think that's the main thing. A lot of these concepts are not that new, I believe, but that you can talk about them, for example, by talking about, hey, you have the fog of beforehand. Like before starting, there's a fog. And the only way to remove it is not by thinking or analyzing or talking, but by taking a step in the fog, doing something. The fog of speculation, right? Like too much thinking. Well, there's this fog, and you're going to inject the fog of speculation. There's going to be even more fog because you cannot see all the steps. So all these concepts, I think, enable the right conversations. So that's the main thing, I hope, that somebody reads the book and then thinks about, hey, now I can talk about management, about these things, and make them explain to them why a roadmap of 1 year with features on it and precise timelines is never going to work.
I'm curious, looking at you, Jim, as well. You're working with corporate America, and I imagine that they have an even bigger fog of beforehand. What's your experience with that?
Yeah, one of the biggest impediments or patterns that I see that maybe are holding companies back is sprint goals, as an example, feel really simple.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, that's so simple. Like, so they equate the clear nature of what a sprint goal is conceptually with it's not going to make that big of a difference. But it has been the single most impactful thing to both of my biggest clients right now. Like when I have been able to work with teams and say, because one of the things they asked me to do, Maarten, is can you model good Scrum for us or good Kanban? And I have a way of doing that, and I talked to them about it. But I warned them. I said, it might not look or feel in any given day or meeting much different than you think. But then when we look back, they're like, holy crap, we totally see how sprint goals are so impactful. And you feel this sense of pride of achieving a goal, and you see people collaborating and they're moving towards our goal instead of my work versus your work. And it's really easy for me to show those benefits to teams, but getting them to even see how something so simple looking or seeming can be that impactful is the biggest problem. So one of the questions I have for you is, can you tell a story, briefly, of a time when a sprint goal or moving towards having goals in general made a massive difference? And then if you have any times where it didn't or led to something unexpected, I'm sure our audience would love to hear that.
Yeah, I've got a few stories. So actually, I was a big sprint goal skeptic, to be honest. I didn't believe in sprint goals at all. And the reason why it opened my eyes to sprint goals was because actually I was moved as a product owner to another team, and my old team, and this was in a big corporation, they said, you cannot help your old team anymore. And they didn't have a product owner. So they came to me and they were complaining like, oh, life is shit, like everything's going terrible. What do we need to do? Blah, blah. And I just said, well, maybe you should try using sprint goals. And I didn't believe it was going to work. It was the only thing I had to offer. And then I said, oh, here's how it works. Like instead of saying, hey, there are 10 things to complete, choose one thing, the most important thing, focus on that. And make sure you have the relevant context that you can make decisions during the sprint without needing that very busy stakeholder who doesn't have time for you. And a few months later, they came back to me and they said, we're super happy. Things are going great. And I was like, what the hell happened here? and that's the moment where I decided, maybe I'm wrong. Like maybe there is something there. And then I started doing it myself. And so this is my personal story. I actually joined a new team. I was moved to a team. And basically there was a scrum master who said, yeah, we need to do sprint 0. We need to plan everything. We need to make a vision, like all this stuff. And I said, okay, well, I want to try something else. We just talked to the stakeholders, asked them, what's the one most important thing we have to address? And we're going to work on that. And there was a big silence. No, we can't do that. We need to do refinement, blah, blah, blah. We don't even know if it's going to work. I said, no, that's fine. We're going to work on that. One most important thing. And if we fail, it's my fault. Like, I'll take the blame. And so what we did, one ticket, a spike. That's it. We didn't even know we were able to pull it off. It was automating some kind of report. And I said, well, there are 12 reports. If you can automate one of them and show it works, great. You can pick the easiest one. I don't even care which one. And we actually succeeded. We had one report automated in 2 weeks. And that just showed me how powerful it is. Like, we're so scared of failing that they were scared of trying new things. And I think sometimes it's okay to fail. Like in this case, what's the worst that can happen? After 5 days, we find out it's not going to fly, well, then we do a new sprint planning, but then at least we know it immediately.
How does leadership came to play in this whole situation?
In this case, I was the one calling the shots and they trusted me.
So you were leadership.
Well, I mean, in this case, they gave me a new team and they said, you know what, you can go figure out what matters and solve those problems. It was a big mess, to be fair. And I did clean up things, but they gave me carte blanche.
What was the
and
biggest?
That's a huge.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's a huge difference that a lot of people maybe don't have. Is you were given authority, you took accountability, and you were given, control over you and your team's future. And I think one of the biggest objections I hear to, oh, Jim, that's why sprint goals aren't going to work, is they usually can't see a common theme, or the belief from someone outside the team is there's no way you can tell us you're only going to do one thing. And I think you gave us a great example of this. Is you said you're going to set an example of writing 15 minutes a day. Many times you wrote far more than that. That's my experience with sprint goals. Is yes, it might sound like one thing, but most teams, once they build that muscle of delivering one thing, one turns into one bigger thing, and one bigger thing, or multiple valuable things. And I'm curious if you hear objections to sprint goals, and if so, what they are, and if they're the similar ones or different.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest objection is we have 3 things we need to do. What are you talking about? We're going to do one thing at a time. That's not how it works. That's the biggest objection, I think. And the way I always try to tackle it is saying, look, we can work on 3 things at once. We're going to deliver all 3 of them later, and you won't have control over what gets delivered first. Or we choose. That means you have control, and we decide what gets delivered first. And by the way, all 3 things will also be delivered sooner. What do you want to do? And very often they will go for the approach I pick. But I think it's a stakeholder management thing. Like, I think it's so appealing to have the illusion of progress. That's what I call it. Like, we're working on 3 things. Every stakeholder is happy because their thing is moving. Even though it's moving at a glacier speed, it's moving, right? They're happy. But that's not what we should be aiming for. And I think the biggest challenge, the reason why this causes so much problems, is because our estimates are wrong. And that those 3 things are actually maybe 6 things, you know what I mean, in terms of amount of work. And then we get high work in progress, we kill flow, and that means we're screwed. And we're just working very hard to deliver very little. And that's, I think, the key thing to explain to leaders.
Yet, if you explain it like this, it sounds super easy. Yeah. It sounds like common sense, but like we discussed in the car riding over here, common sense seems to be one of the least common things these days.
Yep.
What makes it so hard to bring that common sense back into leadership?
I mean, let's be honest, right? Organizations are complex. There are many departments. They all have different budgets, different interests. So the fact you're unable to reach agreement is often a symptom of this organizational structure and these competing interests. And the main thing is you solve that with stakeholder management. And I often was a product owner, which makes my life easier in that way because I am the one talking to the stakeholders. I have one-on-one relationships with them. So I could, that puts me in a very good position to have these conversations because I understand what they're trying to achieve, what they care about. And I think that's the main thing where it makes my life easier because then I can frame it in ways that they care about. But I also have to be fair, right? I didn't win, if I may call it win, every kind of these battles. Sometimes I also lost. I wasn't able to convince them. But that's also the way it is, right? It's not easy. I think nobody has a 100% success rate.
Tell us about the biggest lost conversation that you had and how you dealt with it.
And what do you mean by like the biggest argument I didn't win?
Yes.
Or win. I hate the term winning, right? But I didn't convince them. Let's put it that way. I need to think a little bit about that. So, I once worked at a company doing a road mapping process, also described in the book. Where basically they were doing road mapping for like 1 year and every quarter we never succeeded. Like there were like 20 things on there. We completed 3 things. And then when we needed help from another team, we didn't get it because all the roadmaps were team level roadmaps. So I've literally probably 10 times been through this cycle, seen this, and I was not able to convince the CTO there that this is a bad idea. And at some point, I just told him, look, I'm going to make a now, next, later roadmap. I cannot convince you. You're not listening to me. So the only thing I have left is to rebel. And he was incredibly frustrated with me, I have to be fair, right? But the thing is, that was maybe a moment where I didn't succeed. And but ultimately, he left the company. And then I also left. So I don't know what happened afterwards.
So the company won.
Yeah.
You both left. And now they can do whatever they want.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't think they've improved their situation. So.
Well, that sounds like a them problem. Behavior like this commonly leads to vanity metrics. So metrics are being delivered. They're very easy to game. Like the common ones, like comparing velocity across teams. Stuff that doesn't really add anything, except it makes you look nice as a manager or whomever is reporting.
Spreadsheet victories.
Spreadsheet victories. I love that. Jim just mentioned in the comment, talking about, you mentioned, let's be honest. Being honest is incredibly hard, especially in big corporate organizations. It's a nice remark that you made. Well, usually it's not about being dishonest. It's remaining blissfully ignorant on purpose. What's your experience with that?
What can you explain what you mean by blissfully ignorant? I mean, I know what blissfully ignorant means, but maybe elaborate a bit what you're talking about.
I think what it means is it's not about someone being dishonest and being deliberately lying or deliberately undermining someone's activities. I've heard many leaders tell me, like, I don't ask questions if I don't think I'm going to like the answer, or I don't want to ask about this because I know what the answer is. And, you know, in America, we have the idiom, right? The elephant in the room, or there's so many of those, like, and one of the things I get to do, and probably you get to do as a consultant, is we get to say, why are we all not talking about the big giant elephant in the room? Like, all those projects that are green, you all know they're not green, right? And that they're not on their roadmap and they're not going to be delivered on time. Why are we not talking about the actual thing? And that's kind of what I mean by blissfully ignorant, because transparency is not comfortable for a lot of people, and sprint goals make things transparent.
Yeah. So I agree with you. I mean, I don't think it's they're being malevolent, right? They're intentionally aware of that like what we're doing is suboptimal. No, like, but what I do think is that saying no to things now, that we don't like that. We have this giant loss aversion. Right? So we have 10 things we want to work on. So the option is say no now, which means for sure it's not going to be done. Or we can just say, yeah, it might work. We're going to shuffle these 10 things forwards. And then that sting is felt like many months later. We can cover it up with politics. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I don't know.
And success tends to breed that overconfidence. You know, one of the examples that, it's repeated itself a lot is when I suggest maybe an alternative way of doing something, like you were doing in your story, suggesting a roadmap or sprint goals or something. People who are at successful companies or in successful teams who are being lauded as impactful leaders are like, hey, what I've been doing is working for me, clearly. So why would I need to do anything different? And that's a hard sell, because it's kind of loss aversion, is retaining what you currently have, whether that's money or success or political capital or organizational authority, feels worse than going after new value, new things.
Usually this realization comes way too late, and only when companies are starting to go on a decline, that's where, shit, we need to start running right now. No, you should have started running 2 years ago, but then it's too late.
Yeah, but I think that's kind of human nature, right? Like people suddenly they feel like, oh, they get like pain in their chest, or the doctor says something, some value is off, and then suddenly they hit the gym, right? Like, I don't know. Like sometimes we need this trigger, something to really go wrong, where we realize, hey, the status quo isn't good enough. We need to change things. And I don't know. I think it's kind of human nature.
Are there any things in your book or concepts where you were like, this is one of my darlings I have to kill, and I would have loved to put this in, but it didn't make the book?
I need to think about that one. So, I don't know. I didn't kill any darlings. And I mean, of course I've left stuff out. But how can I say? it wasn't never. I never. How do you say? I never left out something I really loved. Yeah, I didn't have that problem.
If this was a Marvel movie, what would be in your bonus content? Like if you got another 3 minutes of the Maarten Avengers movie, what would be in that chapter?
I love the rephrasing. So the main thing is that happened is after I finished my book, I wrote a lot of I read a lot of books, so I had a lot of ideas of like, oh, I could have told this story differently. So definitely, like, so some things I would have done, right? I mean, I don't know for sure, but I read the books Creativity Inc. about Pixar, right? I find it super fascinating that basically the CEO of Pixar was saying every movie we make sucks during development. Like Toy Story, the first movie where they showed the storyboards, it was so terrible that Disney shut it down. Like they said, this is terrible. You have to rewrite the script. And then you might think, yeah, that's their first movie, right? And they have this storytelling recipe. It works really well. They figured it all out. No, absolutely not true. Like the movie Up, the first movie Up, how it was conceived was like a castle in the sky with an old man and two grumpy sons. That was Up. Well, if you've seen the final movie, it's completely different. And I think that's the main thing. Like these stories really emphasize for me is that our initial plans suck, and we need to have a really good process of unsucking the movie, right? How can you make it good? Discovering it, and you see this as well in gaming. Like, and these are all stuff that I would have loved to tell about a bit more, but I only had the realization afterwards.
Up was such a good movie.
Yeah,
that's one of the first movies that made me cry like a 3-year-old girl. But the example of Creativity Inc., which is a really good book. I really like how the writer goes through the development phases that they have, how they rapidly learn and kill their ideas as soon as possible.
Yeah, exactly. And the same thing happens in gaming. That's fascinating. The same thing happens in gaming. Like literally had a book, Blood, Sweat and Pixels, that said every game is delayed at least once. Half-Life, one of the greatest games of all time, delayed 3 times. Like Zelda games, delayed. Like, yeah, I just find it fascinating. And then when you enter corporations, they're like, yeah, here's the plan. You have 1 year, finish it.
Yeah,
I don't believe in that. The new Mario game, they did it differently. Super Mario Wonder, I think it's called. It's a really big success. You know what they did? Prototype phase, no deadline. They just said you have like limited time for the prototype phase, and then when we think it's good enough, then we're going to go to development. The game is brilliant and it's going to break records. Like, yeah.
How do you sell this concept to stakeholders? Like they have a certain expectation of when they want to have their game delivered and usable in their hands.
Yeah. So what Pixar does really well is they have this brain trust. Like they watch their movies like every 3 months, and they really they look at the movie and they give notes to the director as well. Is it good enough? Like I think that's the biggest question. And how do we know it's good enough? Because at the end of the day, we could release something in 1 year. Like Half-Life could also have been released, but would it have made money? Is it good? And how do we know that? That's where we should invest our energy. But it's much easier to talk about velocity or what is going to be done in 1 year, because that's very predictable and measurable. But that's not what's going to bring in money. Like if I tell you a game, you will not be able to tell me was it delivered on time or not. Yeah,
true.
I love that you mentioned this story, because the takeaways that I took from Creativity Inc. and that is, as long as the director and the creative minds behind the movie kept coming to the table and seeking feedback and internalizing that feedback, the budget kept coming. The timeline was fine. It's when somebody said, no, I don't want feedback. I'm not going to change. I want to either release a crappy movie, or, they didn't want to trust that process of a Pixar. That's what got people, sideways with leadership, I guess. And I think that's a key takeaway, is balancing ownership, which you owned the roadmap of your book. You owned the creative output of your book, but you solicited feedback. And so you had the authority to tell people no. And I'm sure you had to at times, because not all feedback is a gift. But you also, I assume, because you got a book to market, had to balance the needs of the stakeholders and the budget and all those things.
Yeah. So if you look at my book, it's definitely over budget, over time. Is it good? Like, I leave that up to you. But what I can say, one thing I can say is, what the editor told me is, she was reading the chapters, right? And she said, the most I care about is that it's good. That's and like, as long as I can see that it's good and it's going in a good direction, then I don't really care about the timeline. And you have to, and even though in the contract it says if you're over time, they can hire a ghostwriter, finish your book, and pay that ghostwriter out of your royalties. So that's what it says in the little,
the small letters. Yeah. A quick question from the audience: where they postmortem at Pixar? So what happened there?
Postmortem at Pixar, so at Pixar, of course in their fourth movie, they didn't have this brain trust process. But I think what they really do really well is every step they look at the feedback, they have an objective group of people who takes a look at the movie, gives feedback. That's the primary concern. And then, if necessary, they will pull the plug or say a rewrite. Because the most thing they're worried about is if we release a crappy movie, it really hurts their brand. Because they have a really strong brand, kind of like Disney, Disney is not as strong as it used to be, but they also had the same kind of brand where every movie was great. And that's very precious, and they want to preserve that. And I think that's the main thing that they've evolved. And as well, when you read the book, it's really all about psychological safety, allowing for mistakes. That's the culture. So if you read the book about Pixar, it isn't about process, or you know what I mean, or you have to do it this way, or the storytelling recipe that you see on LinkedIn all the time. It's much more about how do we create an environment where we look at each other, we can look at a movie, we can look each other in the eyes. How do we make it great, and that the director can take that feedback, because it's not easy.
Can you imagine the pressure of a studio like Pixar? Because beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, right?
Yeah.
And they have to satisfy millions of stakeholders at once.
I think it's incredibly difficult. I couldn't imagine, right? It's a great creative endeavor. And how do you know it's good enough? That's the same question you have when you ship a book. How do you know? For sure, you don't. I mean, they as well had some movies that were duds, right? Or not as good as they could be. So there's no certainty. And if there is, then somebody is going to, make a lot of money.
I like all these metaphors in your book, and one of them is on a submarine.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so basically, this is about David Marquette. So I don't even remember, the submarine that was underwater and the tragic accident. So David Marquette was actually on CNN explaining, hey, based on the current information, they have 1% chance of survival. It was a terrible accident, but he wrote a book, Turn the Ship Around. It's a really great book. And what I really find interesting about that book is it actually tells the story of how he was a captain of a submarine, and they moved him to another submarine, and they gave him 6 months to prepare the whole crew. And what was interesting is in the old submarine, they followed the traditional command and control style. So how that worked is he would give orders, and that meant as well that he would need to know how everything in the submarine worked, right? Because if you know how everything works, then you can give orders. So the main thing, what happened is, so he was on this new submarine where he didn't know how it worked. And then basically they did an exercise where they, the battery was running out and he needed to move fast. And he thought, okay, I'm going to add more pressure. Let's increase the speed of the submarine so that the battery drains faster. And then they did that, and there was a silence. And why was that? It was because there was no option to change the speed of the submarine on that submarine, and he didn't know. So he kind of looked ridiculous. And then he asked them, why did you follow my order if it wasn't even possible? Well, because you told us to. And then he realized this is never going to work, because in 6 months, I'm never going to know the submarine. So long story short, what he did was he actually moved to a leader model where he actually gave people decision-making authority. And he said, you make the decisions, you tell me what happens, but you do so by saying, I intend to do this. And this is what's called intent-based leadership. And I think that's incredibly important, because if you provide people with intent, hey, this is what we're trying to achieve, this is why it matters, then they can make decisions, they can change plans as necessary. They won't need to ask for orders. And I think that's what empowered teams are about. Empowered teams need to be able to make decisions without needing help from others outside the team as much as possible. And that's what I liked about that story.
And just for context, there was one command that he would keep for himself, and that was when torpedoes would be launched that would result in the death of other people. He would keep that only command to himself, and all the other decisions on the entire submarine were distributed to the crew, which is about, what was it, 200, 250
people?
150
people, I think, roughly.
Which is pretty wild. Yet in our businesses, we still struggle to empower teams of 6 people.
Yeah, true.
So now what?
I mean, I think what it boils down to is how we do our planning, right? If you tell people to deliver features, it's very difficult. So, for example, a book, what do you want to achieve with the book? That's a way more difficult question than saying, hey, you need to finish 250 pages in 6 months, right? But we need to be talking about what do we want to achieve. And I think that's the main thing that makes it difficult. If you want to have empowered teams, that means you need to talk about what are we trying to achieve? Why does it matter? What's the relevant context? Leaders find those conversations very difficult. And then instead, it's like, yeah, this is difficult. Okay, so let's go for velocity, or this feature should be done in 6 months, because then at least we can talk about it.
Do you see any difference in educational level when it comes to understanding this complexity and uncertainty with people working in the teams and actually performing the work versus people who are in the ivory tower?
So yes, I do see a difference with the teams doing the work and the people in the ivory tower, but I can say that I've seen slide decks from the big consultancies. So either they are intentionally lying, like I'm really talking like the big ones, right? Like not Xebia, like the how do you say the
What's wrong with us?
The McKinseys, the BCGs, right? Those companies. I don't want to place Xebia in a bad light. I would really talk specifically those. I've seen slide decks from them where I was like, this is never going to fly, and I can't believe that you're selling this. Like, yeah.
But didn't it sell because the content was bad, or because you know that the quality that they're delivering is bad, except it speaks to management?
It speaks to management. It's exactly what they're looking for. So in that sense, I get it, right? So basically they're telling the story like, hey, like you can have 6-pack abs in 5 minutes if you follow these 10 steps.
Yeah, we got to do that.
And that's kind of, so for example, let's say you do, let me give you an example, right? Transformation. Like, they basically said, you need to follow these 12 steps, you need to move to these kind of team, blah, 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 and then you're going to be a success. I don't believe that's how it works. That's kind of like going for the hole-in-one when you're wearing blindfolds. You don't know what the hell is going on. It doesn't work that way.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Jim, you had a question.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things to pull out of the David Marquet story, but to bring it back to sprint goals,